Well, good morning.
Morning. Morning.
Since I'm sort of my feelings are hurt. Since I know some of my friends here, I can't lie this morning. They'll keep me honest, but I'm going to change my script completely to first get your attention. If the screen could show why I'm here. I hate to spoil your breakfast, but that's why I'm here. You better shut it off now. This happened about 65 years ago, and one of the real reasons why I'm here is the doctors sent me a letter when they retired and told me that the reason why I'm still here is, number one, you had some great friends and great supporters and a loving family and some great doctors to take care of you. But the last thing that he said is the reason why I'm here. And he said, the reason why you're here is because God wanted to use you. Amen. And that's what I'll talk about this a little later on, but I changed my script and showed this so that I can get your attention. But let me just briefly give you a little story of my life's journey. I was born in 1926, and I'm now 89 years old, and God willing, I'm still physically able to go. I'm a son of an immigrant from Japan that came here in the early 1906 or so. And the reason why my father was called here to the United States was because there was an entrepreneur that owned a lot of land in Central California where he had a vision where his land was perfect to growing rice. But there was nobody in the United States, even the Department of Ag in Washington, that knew anything about rice. So he went to Congress and passed legislation where he could go to Japan to recruit workers that knew how to grow rice. And my dad was one of them. But when he landed in San Francisco, was the year where there was this devastating earthquake in San Francisco that ruined San Francisco. So half of the people on that boat was mandated to stay in San Francisco and rebuild San Francisco. And so my dad was one of them that stayed in San Francisco to rebuild San Francisco. So that's the way my history goes. And after Dad helped build San Francisco, he became very close to the Alameda County treasurer. His name was Emanuel George, and he had a big estate. And he happened to notice my dad, and he hired my dad as a gardener in his estate. And he had orchards and land and so forth. And then Emanuel George had about a 10-acre farm that he wanted to destroy some orchard and so forth, and he let my dad do that, and he became a sharecropper and started to grow vegetables in Alameda County. If all of you know where San Francisco and Oakland is in California, it's just south of there, about 20 miles. And that's where I grew up. And in about 1920, where Dad started the farm, he recognized then that maybe he better have a wife and start a family. In those days, it was all picture bride in Japan. So my mother, who never knew who my father was, they communicated in those days, there's a committee in your hometown that you write to, and you ask them to find me a wife. And they would search for a woman within the community that fits perfect with you, and that's how my mother was chosen. And my mother came to the United States in 1920. And my father would always say this, that in the United States, you fall in love and then you get married and it ain't working. In Japan, you get married and then you fall in love and it's working. but the real truth of it is, that's what our fathers boasted about. But the real truth of it is that they didn't give their wife enough money to go over the Pacific Ocean to go back home. And they just had to stay. I'm sure that's true. But I was the youngest of 4 children. I have an older brother, Harry, who passed away with cancer at the young age of 34. I have 2 sisters who are twins that are still living. They're 93 years old and they're in California. And I was the youngest one that was born in 1926. I remember in 1930 was the terrible depression in the United States. And can you imagine, in today's society, in 1930, I remember just clear as can be, the banks were closing. The depositors lost their money. There were 27% of the people unemployed. The Wall Street executives were ashamed to face their depositors, so they jumped out of the hotel window and committed suicide. And that's the kind of depression that we went through, but we made it. We made it by helping each other. And that's what I grew up in. And so to this day, even though society is doing somewhat well, we're still of the same teaching we had of helping each other. And but can you imagine, in those days, there wasn't the vocabulary of homeless. They were called tramps. They would ride the freight cars and go from one community to another with a little blanket in their back, folded. And I remember, since our farm was close to a railroad track, I remember them coming to our home and my mother making them a sandwich or a rice bowl or something. And we survived somehow. So that's what we grew up with, and this is something that I still preach, is the heavy depression during the 1930s and what we went through. What did that do? That built the strong character of our people in our United States. And that brought the importance of the value of working. That brought the importance of the free enterprise system, that the capitalistic free enterprise system, that we all knew that if you worked hard and think a little smarter, you can get ahead. And that's the philosophy that I see in today's society here that we're sort of losing. So we screwed it up, so I expect you young kids down there to straighten it back up the way it is. Dad started a 10-acre vegetable farm there and became very, very successful. He grew everything that you could think about. And we were so poor, I remember Dad going with his horse and buggy and this wagon full of vegetables to the town, and we went on the barter system. He would trade vegetables for meat and bread I still remember that. In fact, this grocery store even had a hardware store, so he would even trade vegetables for a single row planter of vegetables. And the part that really tickled me, and I still remember this being a young 5 or 6 year old, where he would ask the butcher for bones, and if he had any bones. And the butcher said, "Oh, Mr. Sakata, I didn't know you had dogs." "Oh, he said, "I got lots of dogs." But what did Dad do with those bones? He would make soup. He didn't give it to the dogs. He made soup, and boy, it tasted good. He would boil those bones for days and add vegetables to it. But prior to that, the reason why he did the cooking is when I was 6 years old, my mother passed away. She passed away with pneumonia. If there was penicillin in those days, she would be here yet today. But I still remember my dad, and growing up as a Buddhist, I still remember in the hospital when the doctors told my dad that it was the end of my mother. I still remember my dad kneeling aside her bed and praying that please take me instead of mother, because the children need you more than they need the father. I still remember that vividly. But mother passed away, and Dad never remarried. He raised all of us 4 kids all by himself and never remarried. And many people, I remember many of his friends would come and try to fix him up with a widower. And I remember him saying that if you could find a woman that would marry me for my children, I'll consider it. But I remember him saying that. But he raised all of us, all by himself. And I'll fast forward a little bit, where we started to do pretty well. And then the turning point of my life was in December 7th, 1941, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. That was one of the most embarrassing experience and very concerning experience that our whole family had. And because of the press that spread so much propaganda about us Japanese Americans, there would be great big headlines saying you cannot trust a Jap. A Jap is always a Jap. And that discrimination by the press, the San Francisco Examiner and the Oakland Tribune, was so strong that the kids that I went to school with started to turn against us. And it was not a very good experience. And there were some curfews where Dad was still farming, but we would go out in the field to harvest our vegetables, so he would go to the morning market, and we would be out there a little after 9 o'clock, and here comes the sheriff with lights on to see what we were doing. And you could tell the only reason why the sheriff would know is our neighbor for many, many years probably called the sheriff. So that's the strength of the press that could turn people's mind. But because of that, we were all evacuated from the West Coast. And can you imagine today, at that time, why because of the bad press and people turning against us, we had a mass evacuation of a little over 110,000 Japanese Americans that were forced to leave their homes into what they call the relocation camp, but it was really a concentration camp. Can you imagine in today's society an ethnic group of 110,000 people quietly and peacefully leaving their home and doing what the government told them to do? Excuse me. Can I have some of my coffee? I've been telling them my opening remark is that you're very fortunate to have Pastor Brad here as really an honest, strong leader. But there's one thing that he didn't obey my rules. I told him for breakfast I normally have a Bloody Mary or a screwdriver. So he doesn't just give me some black coffee. But I've got to know Pastor Brad since he became the leader of our Rotary Church. And certainly I say this from the bottom of my heart. You're so fortunate to have such an honest, strong leader here in this church. You're going to get him swell-headed by tonight. Thank you. Thank you. It's so great for all of you to appreciate what a person is doing so much. But speaking about the evacuation, we were all asked to leave our home. And so we left everything there. We were doing pretty well, but my dad had gained some nice equipment and a team of horses. And I remember my dad just giving the team of horses to our neighbors to take care of. But looking at all what we went through as far as the evacuation is concerned, to cut this story short, I look at all that as a blessing in disguise. You know, I'm a firm believer that when you experience and living in a freedom like this, there are some sacrifices that you have to pay. And I thoroughly believe that the price I had to pay, that I've paid for having the privilege of living in this great United States, was what I went through in the evacuation. And I have no hard feelings. They did wrong, but I have no hard feelings. And I look at it as a blessing in disguise. And I would have never known all of you nice people if it were not for the evacuation from the West Coast. So that's my true feeling. Now, how did I get to the Colorado? When that bus took us to Topaz, Utah, middle of nowhere in south of Salt Lake City, it was just a plain Dust Bowl desert. And when the bus stopped there for the gate to enter, I saw 4 sentries. And the thing that we were told was that one of the reasons why we're evacuating all of you is for your own good. Because if Japan ever landed in the West Coast, all of you look alike. And for your own safety, we're sending you inland. Well, that was a very good propaganda to convince us that they were doing right. But when the bus stopped at Topaz, Utah relocation camp, they called it the relocation camp, but it was a concentration camp. And there were 4 sentries. Instead of their guns pointing outside, the guns were pointing inside. And I said to myself, there's something wrong. And I don't dare to tell this to my dad or he'll get angry. So all I did was I asked my dad if I could personally pursue an avenue where I could legally leave the camp. And he said, go right ahead. So it took me 3 months, but I found out we had an organization at that time called the Japanese American Citizen League, headquartered in Washington. And I wrote to him and asked him how I could legally leave this camp. And all I had to do was have a respected Caucasian person endorse my citizenship, and I would be able to leave the camp. And lo and behold, I was very fortunate that back in California, where I was going to high school, my ag teacher became a professor at Colorado State University. So I wrote to him, and he's the one that wrote the letter to endorse my citizenship, and I was able to leave. And the reason why I came to Colorado was because of Governor Carr. Governor Carr was the only governor in the Midwestern states that stood up and said, what Washington is doing to the Japanese Americans in California is against the Constitution and is completely wrong. And everybody found out in history that he was right. But because of the statement he made, his political career completely ended. You could see his statue now in the new Supreme Court building. But it took 20 years, about 30 years after he mentioned that, where society and Congress recognized that he was right, he was correct. And Joanna and I, we were very generous in contributing towards his monument in the state capitol. And if you go in to the state capitol, right next to the governor's office, you would see a big plaque in honoring of what he did as a great citizen of this country. So that's the reason why I came to Colorado. And when we came to Colorado, there was a book that I read when I was in high school, Diamonds in Your Backyard. And what that book stated was, if you live in one place all your life, there are times when you cannot see the opportunities around you. And that was so true. When I came to Colorado, I worked for a farmer. His name was Bill Schluter. And I worked for him, milked cows for him in the morning and the evening, and still went to school. And during the weekends, I would work for him full time. But I saw where farming, agriculture was 50 years behind in Colorado compared to what we were doing in California. And so I saw opportunities, great opportunities here. And the opportunities rose when Mr. Bill Schluter, somehow or the other, became very trustworthy of me. Excuse me. Now, Brad, if you brought me the Bloody Mary, I wouldn't have to. I was so blessed that he trusted in me, and he would ask me, Bob, wouldn't you like to bring your family that's in the camp into Colorado? And I said, I sure would like to, but it's going to be difficult with the kind of finances I believe we have. And he called me into the house, and Mrs. Schluter made the best homemade butter, homemade cheese, homemade cottage cheese. But he just asked me, how much money do you think your whole family has put together? And he said, so I told him that I knew it. I think if we gathered all the pennies we put together, I think we have about $1,200 in cash. And he just said, and that was it. Next time he called me in, he said, Bob, I bought you and your family a farm, and you can pay me back anytime you want to. So call your family from the camp into Colorado. And this was in 1945. And that was one of the greatest breaks in my life. And it was the 40-acre farm that is now standing where the Vicon Junior High is. That was the first farm that we owned right there. And so we sent for I sent for my brother and my father, my two twin sisters, and we settled there on that 40-acre farm. And we started off with a team of horses and an old John Deere 8 tractor and started to farm that 40-acre farm. But lo and behold, At that time, there was no one that did any large-scale farming of vegetables. It was these excellent farmers in the Welby area, and they were mostly from the Italian descent, that were outstanding farmers that farmed 2-3 acres at a time. Well, we started to grow 40 acres of vegetables, and that was monumental at that time. And we expanded quickly. You see, in those days, there wasn't the technology to bring in fresh vegetables from California. There wasn't that technology. So when we were able to grow fresh head lettuce and vegetables here, while every major store, and at that time in Denver, it was called Miller Supermarket that King Soopers bought. It was Safeway, and there was Associated Grocers, all the small grocery chains. So we expanded quickly after the first year being so successful. And we were really doing well. And I remember my father calling me into the potbelly stove heater, and he said, "Bobby, I want to talk to you." And I thought, my, what did I do wrong? And he sat me down and he called me by my Japanese name, Yoshiharu. And he said, "Yoshiharu, I want to talk to you." And I said, "Dad, what did I do wrong?" He said, "That's the reason why I want to call you in." He said, "You work hard, everything you touch turns into gold, and you're doing extremely well. And I'm afraid that someday you're going to fall. And the day that you fall, I want you to know the real true proof of a man is to be able to get up and go back strong again." He said, somehow or the other, why, I felt I should tell you that. My goodness, it had to be God's wisdom where he mentioned this, because it was the following year we did so well that my dad did not go back to Japan for 70 years. And my brother Harry and I felt that we should at least reward my dad to give him a round-trip ticket to Japan to finally go see his brother. So I was the one that was asked to take Dad to San Francisco, accompanied by my good friend, back to San Francisco to get his passport and everything ready for him to travel to Japan. And on the way back from California, on bloody Highway 66 in New Mexico, early in the morning, the sun was shining against me, and there was a great big load of semi-beans in the crest of the hill that I didn't see, and I hit it, and it killed my father instantly and my good friend, and landed me in the hospital. And this is when probably was the toughest time of my life, worse than the burns that I've had. And I was in the St. Anthony's Hospital in Denver, and the answer that kept on asking was, why me? Dad was ready to finally see his folks in Japan for after 70 years. And my best friend, Johnny Karachi, was ready to get married. And here I was, a single person with nothing to care for that was alive. And that was the toughest time of my life. The burn was physical burn, but this was a mental pain. And fortunately, being in the St. Anthony's Hospital, why the fathers and the nuns, the nurses there, helped me quite a bit. And the Buddhist ministers would come to me and see me quite often. And their Japanese word in the Buddhist ministry that they would tell me was Sakata ga nai. And that meant that it can't be helped. It can't be helped. And that wasn't an answer that was good enough for me to understand. And so this is when I started to study the Bible. And my father and the nuns at the Catholic hospital helped me quite a bit. And this is when I finally came home and started a search for churches. And I became a Christian. But after that was this accident that I had, working in the shop. And I worked till a little past midnight trying to finish a project. And then in the following morning, I worked till midnight, cold. I shut all the doors in the shop. And all the fumes that I was welding with settled in an empty barrel. And the following morning at 6 o'clock, when I went there to start finishing the job, and I lit the torch, and boom, everything exploded. And this is when I ran out of the building and tried to stop the flames of my coveralls and then in the snow, and I hollered at my father, at my brother. And this was right there on the two-story house, right on the 4th and Bromley Lane. And my brother came out and he called the ambulance, and I still remember Jack Dewey picking me up with the ambulance, and he was a young kid then too. And I told him that please, if you could give me a cigarette, probably the last one I'll be smoking. But they took me to Colorado General Hospital, and they had me covered with a white sheet. And fortunately, my late brother Harry called my family doctor and told him where I was. I still remember my family doctor coming to me and opening up the sheet and saw my face, and I thanked him for all he did. And I said, I think this is goodbye. And I could hear him raising hell with all the doctors and nurses. They're saying, you don't know this guy, take him to surgery quick. And I went to surgery, and they were peeling out the burns coveralls in my skin. And the doctor said, we don't have to put him to sleep. He can't feel a thing anyway. And the nurse said, doctor, he knows everything that's going on. I had my hands behind my head, laying down, and the doctor asked the nurse, how do you know? He says, he's gripping my hands to the point where he could just about break my hand. But I knew what everything was going on. And at that time, it was found that 66% of my body was burned 3rd degree. My legs, the only area that I wasn't burned was my chest and my stomach. At that time, they developed what they call the postage stamp grafting. And they took skin off my stomach 18 times to graft bones. No, not 8, 27 times. I went to surgery 27 times. And you could put the...
They're on there.
It's on now. Well, that was 10 months after all the 27 surgery, skin graft, postage stamp little pieces. And the doctor said that they really learned something from my burn, that if there was an atomic bomb that they had enough talent and enough medicine to just care for 3 burns like this. And so I became history at the university. And I've gone back to them quite often in the amphitheater, undressing and showing the students what I went through and what modern medicine at that time have done. Now, I'm getting absent-minded, Brad. But I was in the hospital for a year. And I don't think I could have survived if I didn't have faith in God. And that was one of the main reasons why I'm here today and being able to talk to you. And as the doctor written in his last letter, that one of the reasons why you're here, because God wanted to use you. And I have made these presentations at many churches now. And I've been asked to speak at the pulpit on some Sundays instead of just a breakfast. But during the time that I was there for a year, I have to tell you, the pain was severe. And I don't know how often I've asked, please, to take me home, because this pain was just unbearable. I was told by the nurses that they have given me enough narcotics, morphine, Demerol, to kill a man that's about 400 pounds and 9 foot tall. And in fact, the morphine and all the drugs wasn't enough to kill some of my pains. And they were putting alcohol into my veins to get me drunk, so that I could withstand the pain. And then there were 3 doctors that came into my room 6 months after I was in the hospital. And they came in and they said, we got good news and bad news. And so I said, well, give me the good news. And they said, the good news is that we're going to be able to take you out of the serious SI list, which is the serious list, and get you in a ward where you're no longer categorized as a serious list. You're going to make it now. So that was the good news. So I said, what's the bad news? The bad news, he said, they started asking about my finances and my education. And when they asked about the finances, I got a little disturbed and I said, oh my goodness, doctor, aren't we paying our bills? I did not have any insurance. Aren't we paying our bills? And the doctor said, no, you're right up to paying your bills. We had to mortgage a couple of farms, but we paid for all the hospital and the doctor bills. So what was the other bad news? The bad news is the reason why we're asking you for your personal education and your finances is because we thought that we better warn you now that you're going to make it, you're going to live, but you will never walk again. And you're going to be uncomfortable even on a wheelchair because your buttocks is completely burned. And so we thought we better warn you now that you're going to make it, but you'll never walk again. And you'll never be able to even sit comfortably. So I looked at the doctors and I said, thank you, doctor, for letting me know this good and bad news. But I said, please take care of me medically the way you know how best. And let me and my God figure out whether I'll walk again. And I made it. And you could see by that picture, you couldn't do it by yourself. You had to have God's help. You had to. And so, here again, if any of you, that movie, God is Not Dead, if you didn't see that movie, well, I'm a proof that God is still alive. And let me, I'm going way over. Okay. But let me say that one of the greatest blessings that have been bestowed upon me was in 1956. This was after I was born. Why, my wife Joanna, a young, beautiful lady, agreed to marry me. And I was not physically 100%. But she agreed to marry me, and we've been married now for 59 years. We'll be celebrating 60 years. And every night, instead of counting sheep now, every night, well, I count my blessings. Amen. And the first blessing that I thank the Almighty for was for blessing me with such a devoted, supportive, caring wife, Joanna, for 60 years. And not only did she take care of me for 60 years, but she blessed me with 3 outstanding children who have all become great contributors to our society. And one of the greatest things that I will convince you about God is when Joanna and I got married, we went to see our family doctor. Not because we wanted to know about the birds and the bees, but it's been heard that anyone that had taken the narcotics that was given to me may not be able to have healthy children. And so we went to see our family doctor, and lo and behold, he was a Christian. Lo and behold. And he told us that you let nature take its course. He said, that's not medical science. God will prepare you for whatever you desire. And here we have 3 healthy young kids that have become great contributors to our society. So sometimes medical science isn't completely right, because they said they gave me enough narcotics to kill a man 400 pounds, and that it will have an impact in your genes later on. So there again is a proof from God of what God can do. And without God's blessing, I could have never made it. So I guess I will end by this and ask the crowd if you have any questions. This is a very simple thing, but I have been convinced for many, many years that without faith in God, there is no meaning and purpose to human life. And thank you very much for asking me to speak to you. Much of your time, but if there's any questions, I'd be glad to